What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Phoenix channel. Today is May the 25th, 2020. If you like the content, consider hitting the like button. Consider subscribing to this channel. So we're obviously in the Bitcoin post-halving, and Bitcoin for the most part is hovering around where we thought it was going to be, which is between the $8,000 or high sevens to the 10,000-ish mark. And that's actually a really good sign, considering that most assets are in a deflationary type environment outside the ones that are highly manipulated. Those being stocks, which are highly manipulated because they're being bought up by the Fed or its agents. And, even housing is seeing some type of subsidy and manipulation because of all the forbearance programs and added lower interest rates. And so what you guys have to understand is that all these are basic strings that the Federal Reserve and others like them are pulling to keep the impression or give the perception that things are still amazing, things are still stable, which we all know they're not. But with that said, they have some additional runway, in my opinion, to inflate these asset prices. And it doesn't necessarily correlate with your success as an individual, as a worker, as a professional, as an investor, because every time the interest rates are lowered, you can borrow more. They can assign you more debt for the same monthly interest payment that you're paying. So the same house at $250,000 at 5% may be similar or identical financially for you as a house at 270 or 280 at 3%. So they can use that, I guess they can use this interest rate to give the impression of wealth being or prosperity occurring when it's really nothing more than the interest rate itself. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that whole thing? Do you think this will just continue, and you think that we'll go from, let's say, a 3% level to perhaps a near 0% level? And what would that look like if that was even possible? Those are the kinds of things I think that are in the realm of what's possible today, not because I want them to happen, but because it's a reality of the types of things that the Federal Reserve is talking about or discussing. The other thing that is really interesting is we're seeing that even the way of life, or the standard of life for a lot of younger people especially, is changing. While at the same time there's an unveiling of the frauds that have existed for a long time, namely the educational fraud and the fact that people go to these universities, pay thousands of dollars in loans, and come out and are not economically viable to even get a job that can pay off the loans. So in fact, they've just indebted themselves, and they've been given the shaft, and they've been told a narrative that, you go to school, you get good grades, and you go get a job, and then you sign up for more debt by buying a house. And it's just turning out that a lot of this is total fraud, because of the fact now that young people are realizing that this school system, this university system, most of it is garbage. Most of it does nothing, absolutely nothing, to help produce anything that society needs. While at the same time, again, we have a lot of housing forbearance programs that are hoping to kick the can down the road for the housing, in a sense that allows people to defer or pause their mortgage payments for at least 6 months, and potentially extend that another 6 months after that forbearance period. So they would get, in theory, a total of a year to not have to pay their mortgage, and ultimately tack that on to the end of their loan, which would be a 30-year loan. Well, if you think about it, the government just, in a sense, rewarded these people who take on this debt, because someone who's paying, let's say, $1,500 a month and let's say they go into forbearance, and let's say they get that extended for a year, that would approximately be $18,000. Because of the way the markets are manipulated, you could argue that someone could invest that money, reinvest that money, which would be the $18,000, over a period of 30 years and easily make up the $18,000, thereby effectively getting away without putting the amount that they forbearanced on. So it's a really interesting and weird, screwy world we live in. I'm not saying it's good or bad, I just think it's interesting that because everything now is kind of derived in debt, debt is essentially, in some ways, people who actually have more debt are running away with the assets. And I think you're seeing more of that. Like even here locally, we're seeing a lot of developers that are coming in and buying up land and building apartments. And I don't think that's just because they are real estate investors. I think it's just because of the fact that they know they can get the money, or they have the connections to get this money very cheaply or almost for free, the loan effectively for free. They can build this asset, and essentially for the life of that asset now they can charge market rate and make substantial amount of money, almost to the point of probably not even having to really pay the true cost of that asset over a 30-year period. So it's a real it's a really interesting environment from that perspective, because I think a lot of average folks are still looking at the markets today and thinking that things are rising, so that means prosperity, that means making more money. But in fact, a lot of these things are just, in a sense, getting manipulated up and artificially taken away from even their grasp of potentially even acquiring, where you have an asset, a regular average asset that outstrips what you can make in a year for an average person. It becomes impossible to gain independence as an individual. That means more state control over time. It means the state and the cities have more control over you. Corporations have more control over you. So is this real free market capitalism that Larry Kudlow talks about, or is this some kind of a socialism, communism that we're going in? Because to me it seems more like it is a socialism, communism, where people are going to become more controlled, less free in terms of their freedoms and their opportunities that they have as individuals. And many people think that just because housing, let's just say as individuals, they've lost their job, or maybe they're not making as much money, that assets like housing would go down. And that's actually not really true, because first of all, what I've seen, and maybe many of you guys live in cities like this, but there's been this recent trend of people living in pods. Why the heck would someone live in a pod? It's because they can't afford the rent. So the standard of living, even for younger people younger than me, maybe the generation below me, is changing in a sense that, before it was not a really good thing to have roomies and maybe live in the same house but have different rooms and have your own facilities. Now it's kind of you're striving to be in a pod. And so what I'm getting at is, just because asset prices are high doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to come down because a regular average person's standard of living has gone down. What actually may happen is, or their earnings have gone down. What actually happens is their standard of living goes down, and maybe they go from renting a room with facilities to renting a pod. And as crazy as that sounds, like I said, we've seen that before. We've seen that in Los Angeles now I think that's been going on for like 2 years, guys, in Los Angeles, where these people pay like $1,000 to stay in a pod. Why? Because there's demand, and the assets have outstripped the income capacity of those people. And we've seen this for many years in places like Japan. And so what I'm getting at is those regions historically, whether you like them or not, they've historically been markers for trends, just things that you see later in other regions in America. And so what I'm getting at is it possible that we could see that instead of seeing asset prices come down to acquire them, you see this rentier model where the standard of living just gets taken down and it becomes more of a casino gulag state, and you're paying $1,000 for a pod which is shared in one room by, there's many people, different pods. You could have 5 or 6 different pods in a single room. And so you kind of have to wonder about that, if that's what's in store or not, and if people are ready for that. And it forces individuals, unfortunately or fortunately, to maybe even rethink strategies on valuing asset prices today, because of the ability for the standard of living to be reinvented, to be redefined from what it is today. And so for myself, I guess what I'm getting at is I am raising cash, lots of cash, because it's a deflationary environment and I'm still stacking Satoshis, but raising lots of cash, and in the next 6 months really have to take a look at land and real estate, because we may be in that type of a scenario where you could actually see all these asset prices rise tremendously. Not necessarily, it doesn't even necessarily have to rise. It may just outstrip our income levels, right? And so I'd like to know what you guys think about that. Do you think that's what's in store for many people, this rentier class and lower standard of living? Or do you actually think that at some point this market will reflect real conditions? I just don't see how it's going to happen, because you have so much manipulation of these asset prices, so many programs, so many bailouts. And I think there's so much stake, especially by boomers who own a lot of these assets. This is their livelihood that they spent many decades to earn, and to find a scenario where maybe that all gets eroded away, I don't know if they're going to let that happen. They'd rather just put it on the next society and have a lower standard of living for them. And if that's the way it's paid, they don't care. So it could be indeed that you get this rentier type system with pods and shittier conditions, and somehow the generation's supposed to be okay with that. And so it really forces you to, I guess, rethink time preferences on a lot of these things, and even maybe prospects for real estate and where you live. Because if this is what the opportunity is in America, is that something that you really want to sign up for? Now, in order for you to have freedom, or have choices at least, it means that you have to get out of debt. It means that you have to get healthy. You have to eat right, drink right, educate yourself on markets like you're doing. If you're joining this channel, I think you're on the right path. If you're listening to alternative guys like Max Kaiser, I think you're on the right path, because he's talked about this for a long time. And it may have taken a while for many of us to understand it, but it's becoming very crystal clear what's going on. And it's this casino gulag that's now taking over. And so you have to get out of debt. You can't be a debt slave to the system, because that's the control mechanism for a lot of this stuff. And it limits your options on what you can do. Potentially even your ability to reinvent yourself in another part of the world, because maybe that's what it comes down to, guys. unless you're all about this rentier class. For me personally, I'm really not. So I'm really just open to see what the best ride is out there, see what the best place is there, and take that as an opportunity as an entrepreneur. What I've been doing lately and why you guys haven't seen me on YouTube is I've actually been learning a lot more coding. I'm getting much more involved in bringing APIs into websites. A website I'm working on. It's an EOS.io website, or an EOS.io project, I guess you can call it. But it requires a lot of APIs. So learning a lot about Google Map APIs and JavaScript and React, and it's actually been a lot of fun. I can't do it obviously all the time because I still work, and it's actually out here, stuff hasn't really stopped. So we're actually more busy now than we've ever been. But when I have time, that's what I've been doing, and I really encourage you guys to do the same. Take up coding, take up something that you can just basically take with you wherever. That's not specific to a locality or region. And these are things that you can do that are going to, if you think about it, it's like a freedom bank. And by you investing your time into these skills, you could think about it like gaining badges of essentially freedom that you can have to go and do what you want. And so for me, that if you just keep that in mind, it makes it an easy motivator to stay true to these things, stay committed to them. It might take a while, it might take several months to do, but over a period of time, these things will provide their dividends. At the very least, it'll provide you a different skill that you can even market here domestically in the United States, and you could earn some money by coding. So it's a easy skill to learn. Most of the stuff is available online for free. I happen to be doing a couple different academies. I'm not going to name them because this channel isn't about selling stuff, but I would encourage you guys to maybe go and get an official course if you're under quarantine. If you have extra time, this is the time to reinvent yourself. So with that said, guys, I'm going to leave it there. I'd love to hear your comments. I hope everybody's doing well. And until next time, this is Phoenix signing off. Peace.